Hey, everybody, welcome out to the AI Think Tank podcast. Today, coming in live from Australia is my friend Vincent Koch. He is an MIT program mentor as well as an international keynote speaker. Vincent was in 2020 voted among the top 25 chief data AI officers in Australia. And we have a lot in common, sharing a high value for our cohorts and our given focus. And both of us have studied data sciences and AI, independently. And it's just a thrill to have you on and someone who I have so much in common with, and what we do together here. Welcome aboard. And how are you doing today?
Welcome, Daniel. Doing great, thanks. I am in Sydney at the moment, so the weather is as beautiful as your background in Seattle.
Uh-huh.
Uh, but it is the morning here, so I might
hmm
I might still get a bit more jittery, but my coffee's kicking in, so
All
I'm in
right.
a good
Hey, we're,
place.
we're used to that here. We do that all the time. So, anyway, and it actually looks like this behind me. It's no lie. I know it rains here a lot, but this is real. I am right downtown, and I'm on the opposite end of the Space Needle, but still, beautiful day here. Yeah,
Nice,
I'm so excited to get you in. I actually let a lot of my old cohorts know that you were coming on, and we might see some of them
nice.
pop up depending on their schedules. A lot of people around the world in different time zones, so it's nice we could do a later show today. But you are lining up to do a speaking tour in different parts of Asia and Europe. Is that correct?
Yeah, I haven't announced it to a lot of people yet, but so
Uh-huh.
first time if you're listening, decided to essentially take a little bit of break from AI and data science in sort of
Mhm.
enterprise context the last few months. And really one of the things that dawned on me is the context of AI, and especially in an enterprise setting or just in a use case setting, differs from market to market. And I suppose in the US and Europe is quite insulated. We kind of see things from some perspective, but there are things happening in developing countries, especially in around Asia, and
Mhm.
their attitudes towards artificial intelligence and the way they're looking at solving problems that I think is quite interesting. And it's one of these things that I find that I can sit and talk to people online, but unless I go there and get a feel for it myself, I'm never going to get a full grasp of it. So
Yeah.
I sold it to the wife and kids as a bit of a mini holiday, but in actual facts,
Mhm.
it's a total research trip that I'll be going on and speaking to other founders, academics, researchers across Asia, Europe, and then
Yeah.
kind of coming back in through the US towards the tail end of it.
Yeah, that's great. I know I asked you if you were going to Singapore, and I know you're going to get to have lunch with our
Yeah,
friend Jerry Ching over there from down in the South, and he's amazing. And as a cybersecurity specialist with Deloitte, yeah, he's seen a lot, and he's a good person to talk to. But yeah, I mean, that's where you gain a lot of the value too.
mm,
Is really having those one-on-ones and really just seeing what every individual's concerns and needs are because I know we're going to talk about a lot of things today and
mm,
you have a lot to deliver and a lot of it's also like concerning change and sort of the era of change management that's been going on this year. We're all so many rapid pivots, so many rapid adoptions, deployments of
mm,
things. And there's been a fair amount of success out there, but a lot of this is still a growing art, not a science yet for some of these configurations and things that we're trying to do. It's not as simple as ingesting data as it as it could be, and so we have to work towards that to kind of keep that
yeah.
yeah, more approachable for a lot of
It,
things. But so
It's
yeah.
interesting you touched on change, and one of the things that I always love, like there's a couple of times I've given a couple of keynotes at it, and one of the ways I describe it, and there's a beautiful chart, and maybe we can find a way to plug it in to the views afterwards, is this concept of how we're going through industrial revolutions essentially, and what's happened is we had the steam engine revolution, we've had electricity. We had the latest one around technology that's just gone by, with the dot-com and the internet. But I feel like we're in another industrial cycle, revolution cycle now.
Yeah.
However, what's happening, and this is the interesting part, is the time between these industrial revolutions are getting shorter, and the time for that industrial revolution itself, the change, is getting shorter too. So what's happening is like we're essentially kind of hockey sticking the level of change. And
Mhm.
unfortunately, humans don't hockey stick, right? We don't see now if you were to kind of call this another industrial revolution that we're now with the whole artificial intelligence phase, we're not ever seeing two industrial revolutions in one lifetime, right? Usually it's one cycle or has been like one generational cycle in the past.
Right.
But we're now sort of starting to see two happening, right? So like this pace of change is just scary for most and uncomfortable because we do have this concept of us as humans learning and adapting and changing. There's only so much one of us can change and feel comfortable about that, right? So that velocity is something that I find when I ground people on that concept, they kind of sit back and they go, "Oh yeah, no wonder I feel a little bit uneasy." That makes a total sense. And
Yeah,
Carl's
it's
just pointed
natural.
out in the
Yeah.
chat over there in the
Oh,
question Q&A is like totally agree, which yeah, I think that conceptually helps people understand the mental model of how I perceive change in the current cycle that we're in now.
right. Yeah. It's a lot of reorienting and augmentation, in so many ways. And it's riding on the back of, the revolution of the internet itself. I mean, you wouldn't really have it I mean, you could, but it wouldn't be as useful and wouldn't be as adoptable. And so I don't know about you. I actually I still have to use, the cloud for things in terms of compute, but I do a lot of at-home compute. Just
Mm,
using an NVIDIA card, nothing super special, just a gaming rig, not even a spicy one at that. But it's so good. What we have now, even I don't know if you've had time to test Llama 3.2, but
yeah,
that's so fast. It'll leave your head spinning. And even with a modest card. So
yeah. I
but
have I have been testing some of that locally. I think
yeah,
the beauty with that technology
yeah.
is we're in a case where we have essentially a whole body of knowledge to some
Mm,
extent. We'll put a caveat on that on asterisks, you know, law and medicine and all kinds of different information now compressed right into a model, and that can now
mm.
live on your own machine.
Right.
And like imagine that whole volume of that vastness of human knowledge now being available
Yeah.
at your fingertips
It's exciting.
offline. It's crazy stuff.
I mean, I spent a lot of time during the program at MIT talking about genomic data, and
Mm,
how there's just going to be, hopefully a reawakening of research for certain things. I mean, to me, it's a renaissance and causes you to look at old things new again, and perhaps find something that we missed. And that's exciting. I mean, for me, I think I mean, yeah, it just depends on where you're standing, because if you're on solid ground that doesn't affect you too much, then it is exciting opportunity. But if you're in the crosshairs of change, and you may be, questioning a lot of what might happen next, and it could be not really obvious. I would be concerned too. And there's a lot of
mm,
things that are, again, it became people's Swiss Army knives, where before any, companies were really adopting it, it was the individuals that were using the tools to help, expedite some process in their work, or, augment the quality of it. And I use it as an assistant, and I had one that had quite a bit of agency last year, when I was developing some episodic memory. I think when we met, I was speaking to you about how well that
yeah, we talked
worked,
about
and
that.
then how it just came right into new chats, understanding the context. And I had logged why it thought what it thought. So it was sort of an imitation limbic brain, like a very rough simulation at best, but it still worked and allowed me to do a lot, more beyond that as its
Right.
own foundation. So you get it. And especially at the homebrew level, where I'm not sure if you were ever a Linux person or how much you work
Oh,
with open.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah, same here. Okay. So I mean, Bash
I've
is
got
so
bad
cool.
memories of compiling Linux on a machine that took like a week and there's just like steam coming off it whilst it sort of did its process. But yeah,
Was that Gen 2?
it was Gen 2. Exactly right. Yeah. Painful, painful.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
probably
had a mentor that was like,
2001.
this is the best way to learn this thing. And I was just like,
Right.
sure, let's give it a spin.
Yeah,
It
you
definitely
couldn't.
worked.
Yeah, nothing worked on purpose. It was locked down. It didn't even trust you. So that was the point, right? I mean, it was as close as you were going to get to what was it, BSD, Open BSD or Free
Mm,
BSD, without going through that.
that's right.
Wow, okay, yeah, we've shared some history here. And right now, I mean, I went from using Perl in the early 2000s for number theory and systems theory research, okay, and then on Linux systems, running it there, to now using Python with AI, and all the while along the way having worked with ML and I used to train I do Litecoin trading on Coinbase, and I used open source software. I think it was 2017, and I would train it on data, maybe 2 months of historic data, and then eventually have it how I wanted. And I gave it half a grand and let it make money for me, and it was great. Even on the way down, it was pretty good. So I've had a lot of fun experience along the way, but things are way more capable now. And the financial sector is just looking at this and seeing a lot of more opportunities, more complex types of trades you could set up. But we've already automated a lot of things there, so I think forecasting is definitely a big strength. What do you see? And honestly, you work with telcos, okay? You work with some car companies too, as I recall.
Mhm.
You even did things for Volkswagen,
Yeah.
and have had your hand in a lot of data management type activities. Can you talk about this more, and also in regards to kind of what you've been asked to integrate and the kind of things that the case use cases you've seen kind of come into play?
Yeah. So I think we'll go pre-COVID, right? So we'll talk
Okay.
about pre-AI boom. I'd say a lot of organizations had disjointed systems, a lot of information locked away in places, the classic conundrum of like, everything's a spaghetti junction. How do I drive value out of that, right? The larger my organization gets, more people, more problems, but it's actually more data, more problems, right? Um, and
Hmm.
and compute was cheap, so we
Yeah.
just thought, let's hoard everything because that's a great idea. We'll need that one day. And classic kind of C-suite mentality that kicked in the sort of
Right.
the last 10 years or so is just like big data, like let's grab down, we'll do some stuff with it. But it
Hmm.
actually paralyzed people. It paralyzed people for a number of reasons because they had too much of it, so they never knew what was the source of reality. You can go around any large enterprise and you could ask different people what is, let's just assume there's a notion of revenue in your given organization. If you ask people, oh, how much revenue did we make today? You'd get five different answers, right? And that's
Yeah.
usually like a really good way to kind of prove your point to people
Uh-huh.
because everyone's looking at the same thing, but from a different perspective. And
Right.
it's not a bad thing, but we've kind of gone from these kind of central mainframe types systems to then everything is proliferated and fragmented out
Hmm.
into these kind of different SaaS systems,
Yep.
and they've all got a different piece of the puzzle, and they all want to kind of like bring the data in because their business model is about kind of taking in your data. So it's
Hmm.
kind of created like this fragmentation, and not one system ever has like the full picture,
Yeah.
and created this whole world of data engineering, which is essentially these people that are like the plumbers,
Yes.
and how do I kind of frame it in the right way? The people that kind of keep the lights on as far as the sort of the data systems go, in
Hmm.
terms of making sure that everything's kind of moving between places. And that's been an eye-opening experience for me to see at large
Hmm.
organizations. Because if you take like a car company, for example, huge multinational globally, the data problems that they have are even nuanced down to like a local level in each country. So like how do you bring that to life? I've talked to like C-suite executives of like companies like Coca-Cola, for example,
Hmm.
and the way they have to think about supply chain data and solve AI. It's almost on a per country basis to some extent because it's
Right.
so different
Uh,
operationally speaking, and all
yeah.
the data and everything that they keep. So that makes it super, super challenging. And then you kind of fast forward to this AI realm that we're in now, and you're in this kind of chicken and an egg situation where it's like, I need good data, good quality data to make good quality decisions. It's like, oh,
Mhm.
let's go fine tune a model because that's a cool thing to do. Oh, great. I've got all my call centers. I'm sure I've got all my data there, right? And you take a look at it and it's like, well, has it been labeled? Has it been cleaned? Do you know what's what?
Right.
Even though
Right.
this is real,
Uh-huh.
and once you start asking these questions, it kind of goes a little bit fuzzy, right? They're like, oh, okay, this is much harder than I thought. But
Right.
then on the flip side, we have this whole concept of synthetic data that's also now taking off that
Uh-huh.
sort
Huh.
of gives us this notion that, do we need all this data too? So then you kind of got like these two competing ideas. One is like companies need to build these amazing ecosystems and make sure the data is clean, the governance is there. But then on the flip side, it's like, do we need to be doing that at all? Can we not build in parallel in AI? And I think both are correct to an extent, depending on your use case and depending on the
Right.
problem that you're working in. I
It's
think
yeah.
yeah,
It's scattered.
it's
And I mean, it's just the whole
mm,
concept of having a data lake to bring everything together, and to, like you said, everything
mm,
is spread out. It's not one mainframe. And even if people are using on-prem, a lot of times they're adopting other services and things come out that are, optimized for that, serverless, applications and things we use, any of the big clouds, but it is a feat. And like you said, it's just so much being kept. And I'm in league with companies that produce very green technology to make sure that there's
Mm.
storage to even keep up with this, and stuff that makes it so high performance that you can run off of old hard drives. But making it available, saving it. I mean, hey, you've got retention policies per country and for what you're
Right.
doing, oh, you've got to have, duplicates of the backup. And all of a sudden there's 3 times as much data. And then, like you said, I mean, what to keep and what to throw out in some cases, we're just keeping too much or we're re-ingesting too much,
That's
you
what I
know.
mean. That's like the thing.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's like
Uh-huh.
finding the balance between the two.
Right.
But
And that's,
the
yeah. And
interest
go ahead. Go ahead. Yeah.
the other interesting thing that you're seeing now is that, we had personal computing that happened, right? If we go back to that industrial revolution
Mhm.
sort of concept of technology boom, this whole personal computer notion that came about, and everything was like, okay, you don't need huge mainframes, everything can kind of live on your machine at home. And then
Mhm.
suddenly that disappeared and everything's in the cloud. And ironically, we're back at the personal computer moment with AI. It's like, oh, you can run a model on your own machine or on your own device. I mean,
Yeah.
again, asterisks on that, like a lot of the mobile phone devices, it's not fully on your device yet, like
Mhm.
partially on the cloud too. But I've been using some of the latest versions of some of these technologies on my personal devices, and it's not the best, but my emails are being summarized and my text messages are being summarized, and I can ask questions, and it's
Right.
all happening on my personal machine, right? So I think this idea of compute is becoming, uh, we're kind of it's changing the shape and size of it, and how we interact with it as well.
It's so important, especially with how much edge processing is going on these days. And again, some of the people that I am friends with, they have shown that they can do in such a small footprint what it would take a normal, like very, very large system to do, like in a container. They can do it in a small wall size wall wart kind of thing. And you're just like, wow, that's it's an amazing evolutionary step. But still, I mean, look, hardware is something we've been brute forcing our way through a lot for a lot of
Mm.
this growth, and we're not actually. And there's a lot of people working on the algorithmic side. Of course, they all have been this whole time, and there's so much
Or
of a
yeah,
race for
it's not a
this.
new thing. It's been happening for
Yeah,
quite some time.
it's how
Yeah.
what got us here. But think about like state space models and other approaches instead of
Right.
transformers, and there it has its place, but it's not really good for some things. Apparently, it scales differently, and it's more
Mm.
approachable in some ways, but still it's limited. But I just think that as things go along, it is going to come into some conglomeration of like a real sweet spot between better hardware and that algorithmic,
To
just
balance it out.
restructuring.
Yeah. And
Mhm.
it could be
Yeah.
things like raw
Uh,
energy consumption now being a concern, right? Because the
mhm.
compute that's required for a lot of this stuff is astronomical.
Yeah.
And that's taxing on the energy grid. And now we're talking
Mhm.
about, essentially these large software tech companies thinking about their own power supply and actually turning into energy companies themselves, just given the raw need for that resource in order to effectively facilitate this.
I like that. I think that's a great idea. Yeah, just decentralize some things, and maybe that'll be the way to go in the long
Mm.
run. But again, it is so much extra effort to have to get into another business when you originally started for one reason. But it's an opportunity, and it's a money saving opportunity as well.
Mm.
But yeah, I see a lot of the models that we even have access to download and use, like say off of Olama. Look at, some of these ones are huge, like really take up over 200 gigabytes of RAM to run. And of course, amazing compute. At home, you can spend some good money and have, I think, 64 gigabytes or more on your PC with,
Mm.
a few NVIDIA cards and whatnot. But even then, like, well, okay, so I do a lot of research privately, so I have a need for it. I want to be
Sure.
safe and secure, and that matters. And for some things, I can go on the cloud, and that's fine. But it's well defined, and I miss that compute at home, with certain operations, especially when it comes to image operations and things. And I do run Stable Diffusion at home with Comfy UI. I'm able to
Right.
analyze it, but it's not the same. And
Right.
so. What are what are some successful deployments that you have seen coming out of all this, especially with mixed data and just kind of prepping, like you said, having things properly labeled and having this data cleaned and organized. I mean, as an engineer, I mean, what are you seeing that has worked though?
Yeah,
Well,
so
like,
I think the biggest one I would say right now, and without giving an exact use case, would be
mhm,
startups. And there's a lot of failures that happen in startups, but there's also a lot of success. And I think that their approach, because of their thinking around, okay, I'm going to try and solve this. I'm going to jackhammer this into this technology into a
mhm,
solution and find a way of solving it that's making them think differently. For example, medtech is a great example of this, where we're talking around medicine and all different forms of medicine, and sort of, you know, if we think around like that whole space of longevity and other things like that, and just the way we work in the healthcare system is
mhm.
complex, right? But then you
Yeah,
introduce language models, and it's like, well, what happens when there's not enough doctors, or, we don't get enough time, or we don't get the help we need? Can we augment that process with some of these technologies?
yeah.
There's risks, there's obvious things and downsides, but what if we gave it a go and we found a way to somehow fit that in? So there's certain industries and certain types of industries that you would say is like really highly regulated, like medicine, that you'd be like, this is impossible. That I'm actually seeing the most amount of gain because it's been regulated and sort of followed a certain notion of behaving. These startups have gone, okay, if I was to scrap out the rule book and think about how I would do this, have been quite interesting at sort of solving that problem.
Mhm.
And on the flip side, in the same sort of vein, I've worked on some interesting projects, and it's been cases where people have gone, okay, my organization, let's just say it's 1,000 people, or it's a huge multinational. If we were to do this again, how would you do it? And once you start to think of it that way, it changes your perception. And I had it in my notes with you to sort of talk around this sort of Conway's law with AI.
That's
Is
right. Yes, yes.
the interesting thing that I find is that when we're dealing in the enterprise setting, we've got so many people and they operate in a certain way, and it just happens to be the way. It's just where you are. And you're trying to bring large, complex agentic AI systems into that space,
Mm.
and you're trying to fit it into your existing employee ecosystem and structure. I think that just fails because the technology is not a one-to-one with a human, as much as people are made to believe, like,
Right.
oh, by talking to it,
Uh,
oh, it feels so human-like, therefore it must be human, or it can replace the human, and things
uh,
like that. So what
right.
ends up happening is that we're trying to like cram them in that way, but it's not, in my personal belief, that's not the sweet spot, and
Mm,
that's what leads to this sort of like ineffectiveness, because the way they're looking at this technology is not fully with open eyes to go, hey,
mhm.
where can I find the sweet spot? Where is this good at? Where is this bad at?
Right.
And that's what usually leads to larger organizations just going, oh, we're just going to create another chatbot for our customers. I was just like,
Mhm.
well, does your customer actually need this? Are you actually
Right.
solving
Yeah.
an actual
Uh-huh.
problem?
Yeah.
Sometimes, yeah, it definitely works. I'm not saying
Uh,
it doesn't work, but like thinking through that mindset, sometimes we get a little bit of the FOMO factor, and you know,
yeah. Yep.
we
That's what you, yeah, because everybody wants one. Well, they have one. I should have one. And it's not always a
well,
bad thing,
let's all
but
have chatbots.
yeah, I know, but it's not, you don't need it for everything, you know? I mean, it's really unnecessary. And I've tested so much last year and multiple computers at a time, even with the same data.
Yeah,
And it just had so much running the various systems. And in writing and looking at different data, especially the conundrum of math, and LLMs aren't really geared for that right now.
mhm.
You need some hybridization in there for that to work, and
They're
some,
good at generalizing the problem though,
yeah, that's
and I
absolutely
find that
true.
can be sufficiently okay.
Mhm.
I've
Yeah.
done some use cases in healthcare space, just to talk about one, I think, to bring to life. And I like you say, experimenting is a really good way of understanding the capability of these things and where they go well and where they don't. And to your example, I think we're talking about, I've created like my own personal LLM type solutions, which would look at, say, all my healthcare data, right? And look at helping me make choices, better health conscious choices. So around supplements and test results and all kinds of fun stuff like that. And at the start, this stuff was real choppy because it can't really do addition and math related stuff.
Mhm.
It still can't, but it does a better job of knowing, okay, this number is larger than this number. So, okay. And
Right.
and things like this. So it getting better at generalizing. And I find
Hmm.
that that can be sufficient. Or
Uh-huh.
it can write the code, which it can then execute to
That's the.
logically think through it and then
Hmm.
kind of feed itself
Yeah,
that way,
it can
right? So
count
we
on
find
its
that that kind of,
fingers. You
yeah,
have the
it's
sandbox.
growing its own self set of hands to solve the
Uh-huh.
problem essentially.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And there's so many things it does work with great. And but hey, look, inference is not deduction, and that's why. Think about it. It's inferring so much in there and trying to logically guess instead of logically deduce. And
That's right.
that's it. And so yeah, and I've seen varying degrees of success with the sandboxing, and I've had a lot of success on my own in doing that with my memory system and whatnot. And so yeah, and you just have to be careful. People are chaining different operations together for their purposes, and it's great that you can do that. But again, it's an art of handling it. I've seen people are like, well, we'll just take a corpus of data and then feed it to the AI. And like, well, if you didn't know, you know, a one shot in its context window is more
Mm,
accurate than inference in a vector database. But one thing gets you closer to a larger, lets you wade through larger amounts of data and
that's right.
come to it. But even then, there are so many things to tune. Okay. So many things. And I have, you talk about no code development as well. And
Mm,
a lot of people have heard that, and we all have to get our hands dirty to some degree or another. But in terms of just hashing out ideas and prototyping, it's a really great approach. I don't know what you use. I've used Flowwise quite a bit for different things and
yeah.
and chaining things together. But honestly, are there any tools that you as an open source advocate and someone in your position around so much variety, is there
Mm.
anything that's helping you um, test things and look at things differently? What do you like to use?
Yeah, so for me, I think the no code tooling is really interesting space because it divorces you from the technology more and helps you focus on what is the idea or the problem that I'm trying to solve.
Yeah.
And as an engineer, sometimes it can be a strange notion because you're like, oh, why are you not coding? It's like, well, do I need to for this given problem? And then,
Uh-huh.
I can just drag and drop, like Comfy UI is an example for image
Yeah.
stuff, right? I can just drag and drop and plug things around
Hmm.
and then if this works really well, okay, great, I can then build a prototype or something a bit more production grade. But for me, prototyping and just playing around, I can build stuff. And run a workshop in Sydney with an organization called Build Club, and it's bringing together sort of AI engineers and people that want to build with AI, uh, mostly around Australia, but now sort of globally as well, together as like a bit of a community.
Yeah.
And we tested this concept with them, which was, hey, what if we got all these um, interested people with AI, let's say in product management or designers and people that aren't really like engineers per se,
Hmm.
and exposed them to enough of some of these no code AI tools, gave them a couple use cases. Like, okay, this is how you could build an assistant. This is how you could get some data off the internet and
Hmm.
then create some output. And this is how you could build like a RAG style solution, a chatbot on top of some existing data.
Hmm.
So you show people like these three patterns, right? Let's call them patterns for a minute. And then you see what they can build and augment off the back of that. And it's just totally eye-opening because they for one then realize, okay, I didn't realize everyone's trying to teach me all this like crazy jargon and temperature and all this prompt
Hmm.
techniques and stuff when actually all I needed to know was these are the building blocks of how I need to deal with information. Or I can take information from there, I can manipulate it this way, and I can create this
Right.
output. And I think once you start to notice that, it's a lot easier, in my opinion, for ideas to come to life.
Hmm.
And yeah, there's a number of tools out there. I hate like nitpicking because I think it's like it's case in point.
Yeah.
There's stuff like if you think about orchestrators and things that help you string things along, there's obviously Comfy UI for the
Hmm.
image stuff. I've seen N8N, which is like more of like a drag and drop. Let's build stuff. Not very AI focused, but there's nothing stopping you building AI on this.
That's right.
Windmills, another one I saw one developer show me,
Hmm.
which is like a complex sort of hierarchical orchestrator, and then you've got like the more the flow wise Lang flow. type,
Yeah.
more AI specific. All
Hmm.
the AI connectors, let's drag and drop them and glue them together and build stuff. But the beauty is it brings your idea to life pretty quickly.
Yeah.
And then you
Yeah.
can go off and do complicated stuff. But these tools are getting pretty sophisticated as well, even as an open source no code tool. Like you can build agents in them. You can get agents talking to other agents. Like
Yeah.
we're not talking about, oh, this is some dumbed down version of things. It's got the same
Yeah.
stuff. They've just found a really good layer
Hmm.
AI
Right.
to,
Yeah, the API that it has built into it, like for flow-wise, for example, I mean, there's
mm,
a lot of ways to interconnect, and so it's robust. And I got into all of this really just coding directly, learning that way, which
yeah.
I'm still very thankful for that experience, and I still use it. But as time goes on, I have a lot of tools to try. It's a lot to keep up with. I try to stick to what's supported and popular by the community,
Yeah. I think
naturally.
that's important, right? If we've learned anything over the last number of years in technology, if we think about the idea and the notion of open source and what that means, it's essentially making sure that the technology lives on as well. It's not just about this idea that it's free or anything like that. It's the community coming together to solve a problem. And
Yeah.
the beauty with a lot of this AI stuff at the moment, a large proportion, if not quite a huge amount of it, is actually open source. And
Hmm.
that's quite important because it means that we're collectively supporting each other through research and the end use cases as well, which is great, but it's not as a free thing. It's not a silver bullet. And I think
Hmm.
this is again drawing back the notion to sort of enterprise. Like, okay, I've got all these like amazing open source tools. Let's go build some stuff on that, and we're done. Like, this is going to be so cheap, and we're going to drive some value. It's definitely not like same with open source models. You have to think about, okay, how do I serve this stuff? How
Yeah.
do I maintain it? You can't run GPUs at 100% for like weeks on end. They just completely burn out.
No, that's not
And there's
scalable.
just things like this that just the economics of it when you start to think about it, maybe it is better just go to a cloud compute provider and
Yeah.
just let them totally worry about all this
Uh-huh.
problem and I just
Right.
pay them a small fee.
Unless you have a team that you can upskill for something like this, then your change is going to be, that administration should be external,
Yeah.
and you
And
can't do
I
it
was
all
having
yourself. So,
And I was having this conversation with someone literally yesterday. It's like these companies that were like buying up these H100 NVIDIA massive compute
oh yeah.
clusters for training models because they
Hmm.
thought that's the cool thing to do. Because, I should just get one of these things because every other startup in the valley's got one and I've got to compete that way. But it's like, again, goes back to what are you going to do with it? It's like,
Hmm.
I've got this amazing fancy car. I live on an island. There's no roads to drive it on.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, great.
Yeah, and you lived in the Bay Area for a while before you went back to
Uh,
Australia for a minute, right? Weren't
No, no,
you?
I've been in and out. I've been in and out. I
Yeah,
haven't actually
okay, all
stayed
right.
here for a large proportion. But yeah,
Um,
it's this, yeah, a lot
yeah.
of crazy things happening.
It's a good perspective though. Some of my favorite AI podcasts out there that's not this one is This Day in AI, and it's coming out of Sydney, and those two guys are so great, and they really share the wealth in terms of, hey, here's some use cases, here's what we found, we red teamed
Mm,
this up and down, and actually one of my cohorts works with one of the hosts, so I need to get them to
nice.
come and talk about some of the funny stuff. Those are the people I said had made a fake country singer and had it create songs, and they sent it to a record
I had
label, and they actually got responses back wanting to meet this person, and I was like, "You're-"
everyone's going crazy on Notebook LM on Google, but
yeah, yep,
I actually worked on. I was obsessed with synthetic data at the start of a lot of this generative AI stuff because I
right,
realized that you can create things with it, and now that started getting my brain going quite quickly.
uh-huh,
And I got obsessed with like synthetic personas and getting a machine to pretend it's someone it's not,
hmm,
but then kind of chaining these people together and getting them to have conversations with each other. This was like a year and a half ago, right? And a year and a half ago, people didn't even know what ChatGPT was. So I've got
yeah,
like these LLMs essentially having conversations with each other. It started getting pretty interesting and wild.
uh-huh,
But the
huh.
beauty with that was like, okay, I can mimic someone to a degree, right? Mimic is probably the better word I would use
Mhm.
than simulate and something like because it's not a true depiction of it. It's kind of mirrors and some
An
tricks
impersonation,
involved there.
yeah,
And the interesting I did was like, okay, how else am I going to get my point across to people? Because I had all these people going, product managers and stuff going, we'll never use this, we'll never believe it. So I was like, grab 11 labs, let's take on a concept and let's turn that into a podcast. And I did. I created this fake podcast host, the whole nine yards. It's on
Mhm.
Spotify. It has
Nice.
listeners. And
Uh-huh.
I had that going for like a year. I didn't go crazy. I was going to create more and more. Where it went weird was when I tried to do like two podcast hosts, like
Uh-huh.
debating a topic
Right.
that it looked well, like it wrote the transcripts well, but just the pauses and the intonations were just not quite right. I
Hmm.
think it's at a space now where you can, but as a single host, like talking through an idea, it was magical. And the idea was that instead of me creating these AI tools, again, another summarizer and stuff, if not in context, right? And this is what I'm trying to get to. There's people out there that just want to listen to stuff and just want to spend like have these little 5 minute snippets. So I was like, what if my research or all these research papers that came out yesterday, I could pick the ones that were the most interesting and
Hmm.
convert that into some audio snippet.
Yeah.
And the way I did is I had these like LLMs pretend like one was a VC, one was a philosopher, and they'll debate and then pick the ones they thought were like the most interesting from my
Wow.
perspective. And
Uh-huh.
then off the back of that, instead of just getting a summary, you got like a podcast episode that was
I
personalized.
love that. That's amazing. You want to come work for the AI Think Tank podcast? No, just kidding.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Just
Yeah,
replace you. Are
yeah,
you human, Daniel?
your video
Yeah.
replica looks amazingly
Yeah.
accurate today. Yeah, just like this background's real. Anyway, no, that's fantastic. And I mean, I went so far as to I was running a lab during one of our MIT think tanks that were
Mm,
private last year, and then I don't know, maybe it was the beginning of January this year when we did it. But I ran a lab where we were basically showing off generative AI for Dolly and Midjourney and some other things and different techniques, like more in-depth usage of the tools to get more exact meaning. I have a graphic background, and so coming from a place of really great control in something like Photoshop, using AI to generate something is magical, but it's
yeah.
never really exact. And so I've had a lot of times where, in generating things like, it just made so much possible and it made things so much more reachable. And in that now you can select areas and do editing inside of it. And it's just amazing.
Mm,
But it still gets, things can be a little tricky, but we really liked exploring that in our labs, and it really helped people do, kind of step up to do the basic things that they needed for their own advertising and marketing, and
mm.
but in that, when I ran that lab, I took my hand-drawn art from years ago, like back in 1998,
Wow.
pastel work that's very intricate and with, tessellations and carvings inside of that even. And I fed that art to Dolly. And I said, here's my art. I want you to analyze it and I want you to recreate my style and create a picture of this thing in the nature of my style. Do this in my style. And it did, and did a great job. And I zoomed into different parts of it and had that there for the presentation to show off how great of a job it can do. And anytime you have that kind of room to wiggle and that interpretation is liberal, that's great. I love it. It is such a strength for different creative edges. Like, I wonder what this would look like on this fashion
Yeah.
design, fabrication, and just saving yourself some time. So what? You work with digital software, and you could sit back with CAD, or you could sit back with, Maya or Rhino 3D, and or all the different things for games, different platforms like that, Unreal
Mm,
Engine, and so on and so forth. But if you don't have that time, like you say, why am I going to put together all this boilerplate code when I could just drag and drop it, put it together, and have it,
right.
in a chain?
Yeah.
Or why would I go so far as to create these objects when I could just tell the AI what I would like? And in doing so, last year I learned about some of the best shoe advertising I had ever seen, where people would take and just change parts of the prompt and change a part of the shoe
Oh, yeah,
so
I've
they
seen
could
those.
prototype just those
Yeah, yeah.
parts of it, and it was amazing. And that was before a lot of the full features that we're seeing today were even released on like Midjourney, for example. So, and then Dolly caught up to a degree, but it really just doesn't follow instructions. And I think everybody knows that who uses it. Like it's pulling teeth. And it used to be easier. I
Mm,
want to say something about synthetic data and kind of get your idea here. But you have to be careful with synthetic data. When you don't have
Very
enough training samples, there are ways of getting training data that really make sense for
mm,
a given, subject matter, or, the nature of what that data is. And I know that in MIT, when we were studying generative adversarial networks and GANs,
yeah,
I have another professor here locally, who was really innovating no GANs for synthetic data, and it was 1,000 times more efficient. And it was effective for a large gamut of sampling types, but it really wasn't for everything. It wasn't the general use tool, and stuff like that can be really dangerous, and really just
right.
doesn't make sense. It's apples to oranges. But when you talk about synthetic data, though, like beyond synthesizing someone's personality for the delivery of something, or like you said, perspective analysis between the
That's
philosopher
right.
and the designer, what other forms of synthetic data are you finding value in? Because we need it for science and not just determining the nature of an article or a show.
The
But
problem
are
we're
you?
going to have, and I've spent a bit of time thinking about this because my obsession's around patterns and mental models when we think about these AI systems. Because I think if I can deduce it down, it's a complex system into a mental model. It means I've understood it into its
Yeah.
kind of core form.
Mhm.
And one of the ways I've been thinking about this is that hallucinations are essentially a feature of these models.
That's
They're
right. That's what
predictive
they're
in
made to do.
nature, right? It's
That's
not
it.
it's
Thank
not a
you.
bad thing. Like we keep talking
Uh-huh.
about it like it's this negative thing. And even the word hallucination actually carries a lot of weight. There's
Yeah.
psychologists that have chimed in and said the words we're using to describe the AI systems is depicting our our attitudes towards them and the way we think about them and the way we
Yeah.
build with them. Right? And
Right.
that's normal because all we ever saw was Terminator in the movies, right? So in
Yeah.
our reality, that's essentially what's happening. And this kind
Yeah.
of feeds into one of the questions I'm seeing around sort of policy and good and
Hmm.
bad stuff, which we'll get to, I'm sure, at one point. But this is like an important mindset because you only know what you've been told, right? Like, and you just take that as the reality at that point because the first time you've been told it, so that becomes your basis point, and then everything after that fact is a challenge to that. And you go, okay, am I going to invalidate this idea that I have, or am I going to just stick to what I originally knew? So that's like the original thinking process that I've been applying to that. And when we think about synthetic data, another way to think about it, a lot of people say like generative AI, probably bad word because there's a lot of different generative AI systems, as you know. Let's talk about language models in the context of generative AI. That if we were to think about them as like how they create things, I wouldn't call them they're creating something. The best way I've found to be able to describe it, it's like if you had a room. If you've ever been or remember what it used to be like when you go to a circus and you do stuff as a child. Uh,
Hmm.
Not to say that that's disappearing, but things do times do change. Is that you'd have this labyrinth or room with the mirrors,
Oh yeah.
essentially.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Uh, and I kind of use that analogy to explain these models. It's not that it's creating something new, it's helping you see the training data and inferring that information from another perspective.
Hmm.
Um, so it's not net new, but if you train it on enough volume, vastness of information, it gives you this feeling like things are coming out. It's original, it's different. Uh,
Uh-huh.
I don't believe it truly is.
Yeah.
I think the persona stuff gets interesting because there are ideas that parts of us of what makes us human and our emotions and stuff is encoded in our language, and parts
Yes.
of that get exposed to the language models
Hmm.
essentially, and you could kind of skew on that. But
Right.
like Jan McLuhan from Meta, chief scientist, said things like, for example, if you think about a child and how a child learns, you know, speech and language in the sense of the written spoken part is only a small fraction of it, right?
That's
Like
right.
imagine what our eyes see,
Yeah,
what our
body
hands
language.
feel. Like
That's
it's vast, it's
so much
massive,
bigger. Yeah.
astronomical in size,
Yeah,
right?
if
So I
if
think
you
it's
if you lose your chain of thought, you're not hallucinating. It's like, oh, I lost my train of thought. What were we talking about? That's not a hallucination. And to your point, and to power that, we're not built. Our physiology isn't geared for memorization anyway.
100%. We're
It's built
ineffective,
for reasoning, and you're going to tell the
correct?
same story slightly differently to people. And I'm an entertainer, and I grew up with entertainers in my family. And if you have a routine that you do, you have a bit you do, even the
Yeah,
best comedians will do their best to stick to the exact script, but they
but
still,
they can't always,
and you can't obsess over that either. You lose the spark in the moment. Like, why
right?
does it have to be so surgically accurate every time? And who is this for? Like that. So anyways, and so I had someone come on who was a CISO and worked with the government here in the United States who preached about the
Mm,
exact same thing. These are not built for anything but hallucination or generating,
essentially.
and but the word we're using isn't quite accurate. And if it gets off it's chain of reasoning, the
Yeah.
why did you think that, like the introduction of graph knowledge bases to
Yes.
help put that together. And even for our own physiology, you lose a lot in the averaging of testing, and people's internal weights and biases play into that. And so we're swimming in a language already. But if you quiet the mind, and people who meditate and whatnot will tell you that there's a lot more knowledge there than all the words that got in the way of the acquisition
Correct.
of data, that perception, right?
Yeah.
So, we're left with like really having to accept that limitations as a cornerstone of this technology in
Mm.
a big way because it is so convincing. And
It is, right? It
and
goes
it's
back to like, oh, it feels like I'm talking to a human, therefore it must
yeah.
be human.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. I got that wrong. I apologize, is what it'll say if it gets something
Yeah,
wrong.
exactly.
It's just like a person would. The person has great intentions. They're trying to get something right. Maybe they made a
That's right.
mistake. They meant left or not right. But
I
for
think
what it's
that's where
worth.
they hit the nail on the head.
Hmm.
You know, these generative language models were out for a little bit. I think where
Hmm.
OpenAI nailed it was they kind of created this chat-like experience that felt
Hmm.
humanistic and
Right.
calmed people down a little bit. I think it kind of
Yeah.
felt more real. Whereas if
Oh.
I was asking a question, I had the answer instantly, it was
Hmm.
like, that's creeping me out,
Yeah.
right? Like it's like,
Hey, I've seen it come a long way from the 90s with Babel. I don't know if you ever heard about
oh
that.
yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
yeah. And it was just so funny. And it was, obviously not even close to what we've got now.
that's
But
right.
still, there is a certain amount of uncanniness, that
Mm,
occurs within these systems. And there are emergent phenomena. There are discoveries. There are things. And
that's right.
some people, I mean, look, I can't make fun of the guy that thought Google's DeepMind was sentient, and remember that there was a gentleman
Yeah, I
that,
remember
but,
Red wanted
and
a lawyer and it started,
yeah,
it went off the
uh-huh,
rails and they had to shut it down. There's another
right,
similar one. I think it was at Facebook before it was Meta. I can't remember.
uh-huh,
Uh, don't quote me on the company, but they had language models speaking to each other, similar
oh, yeah,
experiment.
uh-huh,
And I think they invented their own language to improve the communication between
uh-huh,
themselves.
that,
And it
yeah.
started like kind of getting emergent. And it's like, okay, time to shut it down.
I
And
would
then,
turn it up. I would say, let's keep going. I'd get some popcorn and watch because
yeah.
emergent phenomena. I mean, look,
Well, that's
you're,
where it gets interesting, right?
yes, it does. And there are, again, we have to be so careful with what seems human, what's a correlation, and
Mm,
does it really relate where we're at with it? But, um, I mean, last weekend I had a huge discussion about what the hardware underlying this and how we are only barely simulating a part of our neural network, morphology into
mm,
this. We're vaguely, it's an impressionist painting at best. There's no real straight lines in what's going on. There's so much more to it with the wave, the electromotive and conductive wave, electrodynamics, the plasticity of things. And even if you try to simulate it, how efficient and real will that be?
right,
Forget about efficiency. If you get an answer that is complete, is it congruent? Does it reflect the truth? So,
right.
I think that, one of the use cases that I appreciated last year that
Mm,
I was working on was, and I'll ask you your opinion, but an AI friendly internet. Okay. And so you're trying to scrape the web, you're trying to get real time research. Hey, what do you think about this? Well, I was last updated in December of 2022, 20, you know what I mean? So you try to go out and get new data, retrieval augmented generation, things like that. Um, it's important to be able to navigate. And so there were a lot of talks about, and even one of the Australian communities about tagging things like the new use for tags again all over to make it more AI friendly and to make that more navigable and sort of step
well,
up for robots text,
the challenge we're going to have, and this has happened now, is the internet is almost too polluted that we don't know what's human, what's not anymore.
Hmm.
That you can't. It's not a question of trust. It's that if I wanted to do any research, it's kind of like it's hard now. It's near impossible, basically, to rely on just internet information alone.
Right. I mean, you'd have to have a login to a university to get,
essentially.
that large. Yeah, if you wanted confirmed peer reviewed. There was a
Essentially.
tool I used to use. It was Scholar AI plugin that was for ChatGPT last year. I don't know about
Yeah.
you, but that was an amazing thing to just have at my fingertips. But they had to pre-chew all that data, and organize it and vectorize that metadata
100%.
further.
Someone had to go through all
Yeah.
that trouble,
It's
right?
so much. Yeah. And then, but at least it's long lasting. At least it's historic, peer reviewed, usable information that might maybe holds a key to something else later, in going back. Just like we talk about genomic data. My friend Eric Haugen here in Seattle is a good close friend of mine, and he was with the University of Washington back in the late 90s and early
Hmm.
2000s, and he was one of the main C plus or C programmers for the Human Genome Project and
Wow.
was published in a lot of things after that. And so we spent a lot of time as friends talking about a lot of these things. But AI wasn't going then. It wasn't not like it is today, And
Yeah.
so we would just have wild ideas. But now we could sit down and test these ideas.
You
I mean,
can.
last year I went
I
back
had,
to research I did 24 years ago and woke it up, and all of a sudden there I am back into quantum math and like just
fun
making like
stuff.
a lot
Yeah,
of
just even on
progress.
the
Yeah.
genomics one, like I had
Yeah.
a friend ask me a question about something particular. And he's like, oh, you could go do a DNA test for that. And I just thinking to myself, I was like, I don't need to go do a DNA test because I've already done it. I've got my own genomic data. And I was like,
Uh,
I'll just go ask my LLM that I've trained on all my health data and go, okay, this certain genes, let's go fetch it from there's a database in the US, I can't remember the name off the top of my head, that has all the gene pairs given the research
mhm.
evidence-based data. I
Yeah.
was like, write the Python script. And then I executed that against my own genomic data and got my test results basically, right?
Mhm.
And then I go fed that back to the other LLM. I said, okay, interpret these test results. It's like
Mhm.
I had my own little lab, the
You
doctor, the specialist.
you were a digital twin. You had your own digital
Yeah,
twin
exactly.
you were making.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. Wow. There's a point where you just have to keep patching that in with new data and hope you get a good
Yeah, well,
reading.
exactly right. And at that point,
Yeah.
yes, it feels like it solves the problem. It feels almost human-esque, but the risk is going to be the times that it does get it wrong and
Mhm.
lacks evidence, and we don't know what the long-term
Mhm.
effect of that choice making is, right? And I think
Yeah.
this, I'm not saying it's good or bad, and I want to kind of get
Right.
to this because I think this is like the elephant in the
Uh,
room that people think about sometimes with these technologies.
it's a sleuth. I mean, ultimately, you're getting it to go out and look. The hunter takes the dog out and gets the scent of whatever it's tracking, and they track the animal or the person. I mean, the dog's not making decisions on an executive level as to what to do. Found the dog's making these forward-thinking decisions right there based on their physiology. That's within the scope of their decisions. And I
That's
feel
right.
like you don't want to automate the decision making. You want to automate the detective work in such a way where you know that, hey, I fetched all this data, this information about these subjects. Here's where I found it. I'm citing it. I'm sourcing it. Here's why I thought it was relevant. Perhaps I had mine doing things like that. Here's why I thought that. Um, just to give context, because I could break into different parts of that memory and understand why we thought that, and then go back
Mm,
as an episode. Episodic memory in our human brain works in such a way as to be related to the impulse of physiology and the feelings, and like, oh, I hurt
yeah,
myself, and you learn from it. But in this case, it's more about reasoning, and so you're not like trying to put it on the spot in that situation to say, well, what do you think we should do? You certainly could, but you really say,
not going to work well.
yeah, get as much data for me as you can on this subject. Let's see what we can do with that. And that's the best, you can do sometimes. Or unless you're writing your own scripts to do scraping, and then maybe you don't,
Yeah,
you still there's a balance in there. But anyway, what so
yeah.
so in your usage of this, have you found some tool that lets you get more current data quickly or reasonably, or are you doing a lot of your own upserting and ingesting for
Yeah,
RAG
most of my
use?
stuff is like upsetting and ingesting. We do
Gotcha.
find that
Okay.
some of the LLMs, even OpenAI, has now got its own search vector store. So you can
Mhm.
ask it, you can put links in, and it seems to know these things. So they've
Mhm.
sort of moved to like this perplexity style model. And it's the
Right.
same with perplexity. All they've done is essentially created a RAG on top of like internet scrape data. And where these LLMs are actually moving towards, in my
Hmm.
opinion, is like search 2.0, if you want to call it
Yeah.
that.
The guy,
Um,
yeah. It was the joke back then was that they were just using Google's API on the back end anyway.
well,
So
essentially, right? Like if you were to kind of really,
yeah.
dub it down. But But now what's happening is that, okay, let's assume search engines are gone for a second.
Yeah.
The machine gives you one result, which is a result. The question is then what does that mean for consumers? Um, for example, you want to go buy some groceries for something, and you go, okay, machine, buy me this. And it always puts the same branded product in your shopping cart. When I give this example to marketers, they just like totally freak out. But
Hmm.
this idea that, you know, it's good at reasoning, but at what point, if we let it not give us choice and
Hmm.
pick always the top option, you're gonna get like on a bell curve example, on a Gaussian distribution, you're gonna get like what it thinks is probabilistically like the most opinionated or the most
Mm.
selected option. So
Right.
I think that the issue that could arise from this is the fun of digging through choice and having that choice, although we feel like is a chore,
Hmm.
has its upside and benefits to us as well. And I think
Right.
where the internet's going now and how information is spread out on the internet and how a lot of it's AI generated, there's a fear that it's harder to find fresh perspective that's
Hmm.
totally original. Not to say that anything is actually true
Uh,
originality. I think that's one of the reasons why I'm driven to like a lot of human interaction and face to face and
hmm.
travel and exploring and hearing stories is because it's drained, it's washed out by all this other stuff, and it's hard to actually get to the actual, the true innovation and interesting things that are
Hmm.
happening. And I find all these amazing use cases. Everyone's like, dude, where are you finding these stuff that people are working on? I was like, you got to go to the inner depths of the internet, essentially.
Yes.
It's like
Yeah.
on Twitter, these people with like meme photos that just don't look like real people that are like,
Hmm.
engineers in their basement in God knows where, working on stuff, just sharing it on the internet as they go. But like no one would be following these people because,
Right.
not an average person because,
Um,
you know, they just don't look like real people.
Yeah, it's someone else's book club, I mean.
Yeah.
That's funny. Look, I want to make sure we cover some bases here too. We had a
Yeah.
question out there because we kind of went out of order for some things naturally though, which is good. What are your
Yeah,
current
as you
thoughts
do.
on appropriate levels of government controls and regulations, not only to address AI, but the slew of new ground around decentralization of everything? Is it going to open up? It seems that Europe is ahead of the curve. U.S. is overreaching in some regards, such as the Corporate Transparency Act, which I believe is it, the U.S.'s response to decentralized financial controls, but it is masked as a money laundering regulation tool. That's true. Very poorly thrown together and very, very overreaching by the government. I'm fearful of how global and U.S. governments are going to handle the regulation side of decentralization, or even more than AI. Um, it's
There's a few
pretty,
things in that question.
yeah,
I don't know
there
where to
are.
start though.
I mean, like even recently, Gavin Newsom here, in the U.S., shot down some things that would have really hindered a lot of
Yeah,
business in California
that's right.
and really would have created a bad precedent going forward in other places as well because they tend to be a
But
trendsetter. But what do you think about the international level of this among the decentralization of everything, but like the AI angle of this? I mean,
let's talk about it in a few ways, right? So let's talk about the concept of AI safety. I think is a very people see it as a binary thing. They
hmm.
think the option is let's regulate or let's have it decentralized. And as with most people and how they think about these systems, I think I hate to say it, a bit foolish as well because we can't regulate everything and we can't decentralize everything either. There has to be a limit to that, and I think it's a sliding scale, as you know, with most things. It's not all or everything at once, right? And you could say potentially that maybe Europe is a bit more heavier on the regulation than the US, but then you could argue maybe the other way around, right? You could argue maybe in some ways the US is more regulated in other areas than other people. So this idea that one country and the way they see it is different from another, I think is the beautiful work of I hate to say it, lobbyists and the story that they've crafted around this technology. So we got
Yeah.
to be careful around our perceptions of this technology and how countries are looking at it because there's, let's just say, certain
Mhm.
narratives that play well with certain companies in certain places, and they want us to subscribe to that notion. It's not to say that that's a good thing or a bad thing. I'm just
Mhm.
saying be careful of, you know, what's the word? you know, converging on an idea of something without actually having the evidence or the spectrum or seeing the other side of the
Right.
conversation. I
Yeah.
think
Just the
that's kind of, I've got to
bandwagon.
be careful with my word choices here because I don't want to
No, it's
mislead people.
yeah, I mean,
But
it's so important that we question that, especially when
yeah,
it starts affecting everybody's business. And then,
because
it's not
I've
the,
heard things from frontier model builders, like I'm talking companies that have built models at the level of like OpenAI
Mhm.
in the US, and their perceptions on this stuff. It doesn't marry up with some of the things that you hear. They're like, oh, it's very much certain people get to play in that space type thing. So, you know, that differs. And I think you can then argue on the AI safety side, some people will say, oh, this stuff's dangerous. I'm like, well, it's always dangerous, right?
Yeah.
It's like
Yeah.
you can go out and buy something and you can do some harm. It
Uh-huh.
it doesn't change in my opinion, if someone was going to do it, they will anyway. And like I said, the research is so openly available. Like there's benefits to both sides, right? So there's benefits to us controlling this technology and slowing it down. And then there's benefits to us having equal access to information, let's put it this way, and
Mm.
equal access to the ability to grow and bring this to life. Like you're saying, genomics, I could go and test my own DNA. I've got my own data. I can do things with that at home, right?
Yeah.
Isn't that cool? Some people say that's dangerous. Well, it is dangerous if I start acting on that information with any
Right.
idea of what I'm doing, but that's
Mhm.
my choice, right?
Right.
And I think that's where it gets dangerous. And I think where Europe has gone is like, okay, we'll do a tier-based system and we'll say if you're in a super high risk category, we're going to do it this way. But then the issue becomes what do you deem as high risk is very what's the word? Down to interpretation.
Yeah.
And I think
Yeah.
different countries are taking a different sliding scale. I'll show you something on the more extreme end. Japan, for example, has no copyright laws, or probably let me rephrase that. They have copyright laws, but they've shifted them to allow for the use in AI to be more permissive. So you
Mhm.
can actually scrape stuff, build stuff off the back of it, and they want to innovate in that way, right?
Mhm.
And that's an interesting way of that they're going, we're going to solve it in this way. So I think regulation in the space of AI is interesting. It's very interesting because people have this Terminator view, and sometimes that's good and bad. And then some people have like this other view. And I feel like regulation and policy usually comes from, if you think about it, just from a human sense, we get worried about something, we go and put pressure on government or media, wherever it is, and then that usually turns into law, and that kind of cycle essentially happens, right? And how can humans or how can the general population weigh in on this stuff if they don't understand how any of it really works to any degree? I can't even say I fully understand this technology myself. So we're
Mhm.
in a space where we want people to make decisions about this stuff, but the people making decisions and us to some extent don't fully understand or grasp this
Right.
technology. How do we know what's right or wrong, right? That's actually the question that we should be asking, I
I
think.
think what's right is giving people equitable access, those who want to
100%.
evolve themselves to test and to report, as we do as a civilization, as a team. We're
Mm.
all connected now, and it's a
And
choice
and you
how
could
far, how much
you
further we take that to really
and,
team
and
up.
you could argue for some aspect when
Mhm.
search engines first came about. Honestly, it's been so long ago, I can't remember. You could have argued, oh my God, this information is too much. People are going to do harmful things with it, right? Like you could
Mhm.
argue the same thing. You
So
could
like,
argue if you took the AI,
Mhm.
the GPTs of the world now and show that to someone 7 years ago, they'll think this is like witchcraft or something that's come
Oh
from
yeah.
outer space, right?
Um,
It's just we've been like slowly like increasing our normality with it.
uh-huh.
Um, so that's a sort of interesting way to sort of think about it as well.
Mhm. Yeah, it reaches that threshold and becomes something new. Another layer is on top of that.
But
Uh,
hopefully that adds a bit of color to that question.
oh yeah.
I'm trying to answer it, but I don't want to impart my own personal biases and views into that,
Hmm.
into
No, I
into the
feel you
answer.
on
Because
that.
yeah,
Yeah. Just whatever allows people to interact with this and to for more people to suss it out and kick the tires on it, really try these
yeah,
things, see what
get in
works.
the driver's seat. That's the
Yeah,
only
we
way,
don't.
right?
Yeah, it is a tool. It's a multifaceted tool. And so I'm looking at some items here to make sure that we've got some of the big points out here. I mean, gosh, like just the whole change of, that's going on with augmentation, the change that's going on with new services or new things altogether. That's one of my favorite things.
Mm.
The other thing was that we have to keep old thinking out of this too, because these tools will give us abilities beyond what we were used to thinking. All right, well, I've got all that work done way faster. Now you actually get to do something new. Maybe you've never had time to do before. Maybe there's another level of refinement here.
One journalist put the journalist slash writer. I can't quite remember his full name, so I'm not going to be able to quote him, unfortunately. But
Mhm.
he kind of put this notion together that we've moved from this knowledge economy to what's known as an allocation economy. So in the
Mhm.
past, it was like you say with data lakes, everything. Let's hoard data because that's how we're going to decide. Whereas now it doesn't matter. We've all got access to the same, to a degree, volume of information. It's no longer about who has access to that information has the power. It's actually who can act on that information in the
Right.
best way.
Uh-huh.
And his idea of allocation economy was that it's the organizations and the people that can best resource the humans and the AI around a problem space to drive innovation or drive outcome are the ones that are going to win, right? And
Yeah.
essentially,
Yeah.
what that means is that even if you're not a manager, and you're an individual contributor in an organization, you're a researcher or an engineer, whatever it is that you do, you're now effectively a manager because you have these autonomous systems that
Hmm.
have access to information. You're not asking them questions anymore. You're giving them problems, right? You're kind of
Yeah.
interacting with them in a different
Uh,
way. And that essentially makes you a manager, right? In some
mhm.
sense. And
It
that
does. Yeah.
that mental model and that mindset shift is quite important because once you start to see it that way, it changes your perspective a little bit.
Mhm. Oh yeah, that's a close friend of mine who builds a lot of systems at home. He says, "Yeah, I build employees to help me with tasks, for
Mm.
my own, tech work at home." And he says, "I interview them for what they're made for, and if they answer it
Wow.
properly, then I can use them. If they don't, then I have
Oh,
to
wow.
come
I
back
was so gonna try this
and
one.
he's just interviewing them, and he has like I think he had 40 models that did different things for him, and." I was just like, man, that's pretty good. I think he's actually using Command R plus. That's a big model
Yeah,
too. Yeah,
I
that's a
actually use
very
that one
capable.
myself,
That's your yeah,
surprisingly.
okay, all right. I never talk about it ever, and probably because I can't use it at home here.
The
So,
Cohere's models are interesting.
uh-huh.
Cohere's the company behind that one.
Yeah,
I'd kind of put them in the same league as the other frontier model providers in terms of the breadth and quality.
right.
They've done two things really interestingly. One is they're sort of building, I don't know what the word I'd use, encapsulated models, if you want to call it that. Perplexity is an encapsulated model. It's like a model, but there's other things inside of it. So
Oh yeah,
it's
okay.
it's kind of breaking the parts out and turning that into an API. So they've got the the normal language model stuff, but they've got like the parts of the retrieval augmented generation now as like APIs. So then you can go, okay, here's a sleuth of data. Which chunk is the most important depending on this query and request? They've sort of like built these like components. And when you actually start to think about it, if I'm building agentic systems, I can
Hmm.
be like, okay, if I want to handle information management and make choices, I can plug into this model, right? And I
Hmm.
think parts of that human brain, different things do different parts kind of concept comes together.
Yeah.
So they've done that really well. And the other thing that Cohere has done really well is a model called Aya, which is called AYA. And
Mhm.
it's a multilingual model that they've created, and it's meant to be the most comprehensive when we think about like human language, which I think is an interesting problem space as well.
I tested it quite extensively when it came out. And
Yeah.
I have a friend that's in Italy who is a CEO and founder of a localization company, and they take large volumes of work and translate those. And she
Mm.
herself speaks 8 languages very well too. And
But
it's daunting, and so it really takes a lot of human skill to get this going. It takes, and then kind of rolling back into change and kind of on our way out here is like there's so much to embrace, and there's so many companies that need
mm,
specialized teams for this adoption and this reskilling of things. Also there's
but-
the needs, for the fractional CTOs and CISOs and CIOs and
right.
people around and can do this to help shepherd them through this period. It's just
Right.
like, can you come set my network up at my
Oh,
business?
can you
Yeah,
go
sure.
set
You
up my
can.
LLM for me?
What's that?
Right? can you go set up my LLM for me or whatever that
Yes,
is?
yes. I actually charge people to do that, and do that for their own personal systems. But it's but anyway, there's so much opportunity in all this, and
Mm,
in the change, I think it's important that we keep our morale high by
I think
staying
so. I
staying
got asked
informed.
a
Mm,
beautiful question about what
hmm
do you think is going to happen in a few years? Do you think, the whole Terminator scenario question again? And I was like telling people, I was like, the way I think about this is almost like I just have to be optimistic about it. And they're like, I don't think we understand. I'm like, well, if I'm not optimistic that there's going to be a good outcome, like, what's the point in living, right? What's the point in me going about my day if I think everything's just going to upend and finish, right? I think
hmm
we have to we have to always know that there's a better outcome because if we don't believe that, then I don't think there will be a better outcome because we've already fixed our mind to say that that's not possible, right? And I think
Right.
it's important as technologists and people working with technology and you know that we kind of shape that narrative because
hmm
our biases are imprinted on the solutions that we build. Our biases, you know, are kind of on the outputs of what we're
Yeah.
working through. And I think it's important that we don't um, put this fear into what we're working with, right? I think we should
Right.
always kind of go, hey, I think there's opportunity here. There's
hmm
always upside. There's always positive gain to society. And I think if we go at it from that mindset, I think there's
Right.
always going to be nice things. Yeah,
Yeah. People need to feel connected to it in a way that they
100%.
can and understand and engage with it because people who are really close to it are like, oh, this is cool. We're doing this and that. Oh, I tweaked
Mm.
this. People on the opposite end are like, don't let that in my company or don't let that in my house or I
That's
don't want
just
that.
fear
I don't want
talking,
that thing
right?
spying on me. I don't want it doing this. And yeah, there's a lot of concerns out there that, are all worth thinking about. But if you worry and everything works out, you worried for no reason. And if you worried and nothing worked out, you still worried for no reason. Worrying doesn't do anything. So
That's the
it's just important that don't let hype decide for
that's
you,
right.
and it is like if anything, I always like to knee jerk. If I knee jerk, it's for excitement and
Mm,
enthusiasm. That's the thing I'm always willing to knee jerk in the direction for. Like, oh, that sounds great. And usually question anything that would seem fearful or spooky. And it's like, are you sure we lack control here? We did put ourselves in the situation. So I feel empowered and because I'm so close to it. And I get my hands dirty and I know the limitations. Like, oh, you're worried
mm.
about this thing taking over the world. This thing isn't some powerful savant that can just outthink you. It takes so much hand holding to get it there. And then you're lucky that you don't run out of tokens, and
Yeah.
for
And
certain,
this is the beauty
it's
when you get in the driver's seat. I had
Mhm.
non engineer people, let's put it this way. They are technologists. They don't
Mhm.
write code, right? Which is okay.
Yeah.
And when they were in the driver's seat at the end, they're like, oh my God, there's things I realized this thing is awful for. And there's
Uh-huh.
things I realized this thing is absolutely amazing for. I was like, the
Yeah.
fact that you can see that now is
Uh-huh.
amazing. I think the
Right.
only way that you're going to be able to make the right choices with where to apply this stuff is to constantly test it and
Yes.
apply it for your own personal use, even if that's the way that you want to do it. Because
Mm-hmm.
then you're going to be able to go, okay, I know where the box is essentially. I know
hmm
where it plays well and where it doesn't where it
Yeah.
doesn't play well.
Yeah. I mean, beyond the, thoughts of hype and things, we have things to think about, like the reasoning systems underlying this, which, are still being worked out because it doesn't really have that same ability. It's inference. Um, Managing that chain of thought, managing, the accuracy of something, managing a mathematical operation versus a word operation.
Mm,
They're more accurate if you spell the word out in English than if you use an actual
that's right.
number. Now but again, growing pains, and this is clay. This is not concrete. This is not
That's
finished.
a
This
good
is a
one, actually.
growing art.
Mm.
The art of attempting to simulate parts of the human brain. Let's be real. An attempt. And things are going to advance in the next years here with
Mm.
metamaterials and other types of processors. I have some connections at some diamond
Yeah, there's
chip
some amazing work
companies.
happening in that space. Yeah,
But I like half of the innovation is just so we can more extremely brute force without
that's
melting a
right.
chip. But
That's
we really
exactly
need
right.
let's use that technology to come back to the actual algorithmic approach and the formulas because
Mm.
we will find a new language in that will give us the ability to transcend a lot of what was basically the abacus is where we're at right now with AI, you
And
know?
it's happening, right? If you think about like this Strawberry O1 model and the
Mhm,
way they've sort of solved it isn't like groundbreakingly new. It's just the way it's been plugged together. It's essentially
mhm,
this idea that I'm going to brute force my way through tree search or whatever mechanism I use of like many permutations of an outcome and just keep iterating on that, right?
mhm,
So with enough compute, yeah, can a model come up with the n number of possible outcomes for a problem and then test every single one of them and talk to itself and reiterate? 100% it can.
mhm,
Is that going to help us solve everything? Probably not, but is it going to help solve some things at places that we never thought we would think of because it
mhm.
just was one of those n possibilities?
Yeah,
100%, right?
yeah.
So it's a needle in a haystack, but eventually, if you do it enough times, you're going to find that needle in that haystack.
That's right. That's true. That's so true. And that's emphasis to continue at home research, emphasis to continue your work with data science. And I just
Mm.
feel like being on the data engineering end of things and building pipelines is such a
Mm.
fruitful place for people these days. And the growing trend will always be how do we engage our data? It's
Yeah, and
there's really that is everybody's application. That is everybody's use case right now is just engaging it and how and chunk
mm,
sizes and splitting and formatting and is this numbers or is this structured data? Is this
mm,
something where we really shouldn't even go beyond metadata on? Is this how are we?
yeah.
So, anyways, but you really elucidated a lot of these concerns today as
Yeah.
well. In
One
that,
one one of the things I wanted to add, just
yeah,
things come to my mind. I know at some point we probably have to cut the conversation.
yeah.
Was when Gen AI really spiked, I think the a lot of the adoption was coming in enterprises from software engineers, not from data people.
Hmm.
And this was an interesting notion. And I thought I was the one that was spotting this. And I tested this with a couple of other colleagues and researchers and people in different tech companies, and they sort of agreed with this. And what that's created is not to say that this is a bad thing. Software engineers haven't worked on unstructured data and data problems and garbage over years. So if you've done any data engineering, data
Hmm.
analytics work, data science work, you just know data's bad, full stop, right? Like
Yeah.
this stuff is just a garbage dump anywhere,
Mhm.
and you do the
Yeah.
best you can to make sense of it, right?
Uh,
And software engineers come from this world of like, oh, everything's in a database, I can just query it and life is good. And as these problems start to scale, it's like let's scale generative AI in a
mm,
large enterprise. They're like, oh, why is it hallucinating? Why is this weird thing happening? Why is this like? And there's me like data guy in the corner going, yeah, this is not a new problem. We've had this for like the last
mhm.
X number of years,
Yep.
right? Um, in organizations, and I think that's the kind of hype thing that's now kind of coming to reality is that people are going, oh, this isn't a magic wand. This actually
No.
needs a bit of work to
Yeah.
actually
No.
drive some
It's
value. And
it's
that's a
really
good thing. It's not a
promising.
bad thing.
Yeah, it's really promising, and it will get there
Mm.
soon enough. But
It's
and
gonna
I
take
see
some work.
yeah, I think that by maybe 6 months we'll have better like closer to reasoning systems to some
Yeah,
degree that are actually really going to be more over the table and well defined. But uh, that's yeah, there's a lot of hope in all of this, and there's just and it's great to hear this from you with the wide amount of experience that you have between different sectors.
organizations. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, all the way around. And then just having the background that you do with data and your expertise and just you being a program mentor at MIT is just there's so many things for all of us to focus on. And in the program that I took and what you took, I mean, we're looking at the small end of things and you're looking at the bigger end of the same thing and what really
yeah.
it masses a lot. I had to focus in on some very small, very fine focused attributes in that.
Sometimes that's needed, right? You need
Yeah,
both
it
of them. That
really
they
is.
have a
Yeah,
purpose.
reductionism and holism. You need them both. But look, does anyone have? I want to go ahead and open up for questions here before we close up. Does anyone have any questions in the audience here? I know I covered as much as I could here. Uh, and you're welcome, Carl. And thank you for your questions. Um, but anyway, I really appreciate it. I've been looking forward to having you on for a while. Glad we could time this out. I've had to flex my hours a little bit here and there,
Appreciate
and
it. I
this is
appreciate it.
livable. Glad we have coffee together here. So, look, thanks again. You've really brought a lot of things to the table here today that are definitely going to be moving forward into what you've got to talk about into next year. So I'll be following up with you personally and to see what you've got in terms of tools and stuff later because I'm sure
Mm.
there's a new wave here. Like you said, we got Notebook out there, LM. So,
Yeah,
anyways,
these are like really practical uses, right? And I think we're going to start to see more of these like very finite things that are going to become more solidified. They're not going to be these huge things. They're just going to be like these really prescriptive things that solve particular problems really well. They just add value to what we're doing. I think we're going to start to see that happening more and more as we weed through and go, okay, all this stuff, this didn't work, but out of all of this is the stuff, right? Going back to the search engine world where we had 20 search engines and then Google was the one that everyone wanted to use, right? So we're kind of going through that now. We're kind of working our way through. But yeah, definitely can't
yeah.
wait to share some notes on that.
Excellent. Yeah. Well, shoot, I tell you what, we're gonna go ahead and get moving and let you get on with your day over there. I know you've got a whole
Yeah.
day ahead of you now. But anyway, thanks again for taking the time with us. You're doing great work out there, and I can't wait to hear from Jerry when he sees you. So hopefully you'll have a good time over there and it'll be nice weather. But anyway, thank you so much for your
My
time,
pleasure.
Vincent, and keep up the great work. And thank you everybody for coming out. This is Dan Wilson, the AI Think Tank podcast. Thank you for joining us. Have a wonderful Saturday, and we'll see you all again next week. Thank you so
Take care.
much.